Hello, I'm James, the Grumpy Petrolhead. Let us show you our 1926 Ford Model T Speedster. There are more exotic cars. There are rarer cars. But I don't think there's many more cars as much fun as this. Ignition off, choke on, bit of choke, ignition on. Well, that was an exciting drive. We bought this car off eBay. We hadn't seen the car in the flesh, so we took a bit of a risk, but when it arrived on the back of a trailer, well, that was the first time that we'd seen the car, but fortunately it was a risk worth taking. The fella who'd built the car did a really good job. It's not quite as you see it here, but we've made some changes to make it our own. And the car was built on a 1926 chassis with a 1925 engine. So the car is built as a speedster. Not that it's actually very fast, but the idea of building a car like this replicates what a car would have been like in say the early mid-30s. By that time the Model A had long since come out. In fact, the Model A came out in 1927, and when they stopped making the Ford Model Ts. So there was a lot of Ford Model Ts that were getting a bit rough. Maybe your parents had one, maybe you found one in a scrapyard. So what you would do is you buy yourself a Ford Model T, and to make it look a bit more sporty, you'd start stripping the car down. Hence the Speedster. And as the years progressed, some people would start putting bigger engines in it, maybe upgrading the brakes on the car. So I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, that this type of car, a Ford Model T from the 30s, started to become customised, if you like. But I would suggest that cars like this in the 30s were really the first hot rods. So the car arrived. I had no idea how to drive it. And it does look quite daunting because Henry Ford did everything, it seems, differently. He really did it his way. And I don't think there's any other car, well, there isn't any other car that drives the same as a Ford Model T. But thanks to YouTube, I was able to learn how to drive it. So that's what I did. I just looked on YouTube. I did read a couple of books as well. And I figured out how to drive it. And I just drove it around the yard until I got used to it. And very shortly, it was quite second nature. But when you try to explain how to drive a Model T, it does seem more complicated than it really is. So I think I'm going to do another video in the future, and I'll just dedicate a whole video to how to drive a Model T. One of the upgrades we've done to this car is a replacement cylinder head. It's called a Z head. It ups the brake horsepower, probably 3 or 4 brake horsepower, I think, not very much, and it slightly increases the compression ratio, but I think more importantly it has a better gas flow. So it did make a little bit of difference going up hills. It just seems to go up hills that little bit easier. I don't think it make the car any faster, but yeah, I think it was a worthwhile addition, and because it's a side valve engine, it was quite an easy thing to do. There's quite a few optional extras you can buy for your Ford Model T. One of them is like a contraption that bolts on here so that you can cook your breakfast on it. It's absolutely true. Normally the car would run on a magneto for the electrics, which is inside the bell housing. Works quite well. The good thing about a magneto is you don't need a battery. But this car has been converted to an alternator. Just runs a small alternator on the running off the side of the engine here. One of the benefits is you can have a nice 12-volt battery, which we do in the car, and also we can run halogen headlights. And another benefit of it is when we changed the seats, it had sort of a pressed steel seats, and I wanted these more cushioned bucket seats in the car. There was an option of these seats to be electrically heated, so we had those. On New Year's Day in Stony Stratford near Milton Keynes, there's a big gathering of pre-war cars, and it's called Vintage Day, and we have been to the show in this car. It's a good hour drive, and you have to leave quite early. So New Year's Day, getting up early, it's cold. These electric seats, glad I fitted those. When we bought the car, it had a big stainless steel fuel tank on it, and it had a big pressed steel toolbox. I changed that. I wanted the car to look older. So I bought an original Ford Model T fuel tank, which was in very bad condition, and we had to cut the ends off to get inside it to bash all the dents out and weld it back together. But yeah, it's worked fine. I think it looks more in keeping. Not too long after buying this vehicle, I was driving through a little village, and the car came to an abrupt, noisy halt. The diff kind of exploded, and it was terrible loud noise, and the wheels locked up, and I gracefully slid into a nice parking space, fortunately, and so we had to rebuild the differential. I'd never rebuilt a diff before, and this was actually relatively easy to do. Fortunately, all the nuts and bolts came apart quite easily, and the differential had these sort of soft metal, what would you call it, not spacers, sort of large soft metal bushings inside, and they had disintegrated. Fortunately, the metal they're made of is softer than the gears in the differential, and there was no real damage. There was some slight burring on some of the differential gears, and I did try to dress them down with a file, and that metal is extraordinarily hard, and I guess it shows the quality of the parts of the metals that Ford used in their cars. Ford Model T wheels. They're wooden, made of wood. Wooden spokes. Wooden rim here. It's a bit scary, isn't it? you have to be careful that in the change of atmosphere that the spokes or the wood doesn't shrink and the spokes become loose. I've not had any problems like that. I guess it's because they're painted, it does help. But it's extraordinary to think that you're driving around on, well, wagon wheels. But the benefit of these wheels is that if you have a puncture, the wheels have separate wheel rims, and these wheel rims are bolted onto the wheel with just 4 bolts. So a puncture is like a really quick and easy thing to do. Just stack the car up, 4 bolts, swap the wheel rim round. You don't have to take a tyre off, you don't have to repair a tube. Literally just bolt that on there. Underneath this wheel hub cap is the nut that holds the bearings on, holds the wheel on, and that you adjust the bearings with. And you'll need a Ford spanner like this that fits the nut. Now also this Ford spanner, Ford Model T spanner, if I flip it round, it fits the wheel nuts, and it also fits the cylinder head nuts as well. So if you get yourself a Ford Model T, make sure you get the spanner. A few years ago I did a favour for a friend, and he went hunting around his house and he found this brass spider, and he didn't really know what it fitted, and he gave it to me, and I looked at it and offered it up, and it's actually an earlier Ford Model T spider for a steering wheel. And I tried to get a new wooden steering wheel to match. This is the steering wheel that the car came with. It's like a pressed steel affair, and so I fancied something like this. So I tried to get one of these from America, and they were on back order and I couldn't seem to get one. And then a chap from the village where I live introduced me to another local fellow who came around and had a look and said, I can make you a steering wheel. And so he made me this steering wheel out of a tabletop, and he made it out of all these interconnecting parts, and inside there's a steel rim. So what a good job he made for me. So I've got a one-off bespoke made steering wheel. So if you ever do see this, Phil, thank you very much. Still going strong. Oh, scared a bird. I think a Ford Model T is an exceptionally good value vintage car. I'm sure everybody or most people know all the parts accessibility is just terrific. You can almost build a new car from new. I think if you got yourself a chassis and an engine, and the joy of owning it, and people seeing it and asking about it, and there's obviously vintage clubs you can be a member of, Model T clubs you can be a member of. It opens up a lot of potential for adventures, and I know that some people have done epic journeys in these cars. They've done the whole length of Route 66 and gone all the way. I don't know if they've gone all the way around the world, but they've gone, big chunks around the world in cars like this, which is an extraordinary feat when you can only cruise at 40-ish on a flat road, or if you've got a car with a body and 4 seats and people in it, you're going to be going even slower, I guess. I know there are other upgrades I could do to the car, but I really don't feel that there's anything necessary because the car in itself is quite light. I don't feel the need for any more power, and I think the limiting factor on power on a Ford Model T is the crankshaft. I don't think they're terribly robust, and also with brakes, I know that you can do something to have some front wheel brakes, and there's something called a Rocky Mountain brakes, which is an upgrade for the rear brakes. But I can already lock the rear brakes. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but the Rocky Mountain brakes, they clip round on the outside of the brake hub. So the benefit of that is if you have a transmission failure, and so you don't have a transmission brake anymore, but you've still got a proper brake rather than just the handbrake. But I can stop okay. I think very much ahead, forward, and I'm very aware of my surroundings when I'm driving the car. And really, I rarely go over 40 miles an hour anyway. So I can't see myself that I want to change anything about this car. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Grumpy Petrolhead. Next week, I think we'll stick with a Ford Model T, because we'd like to show you how you actually drive a Ford Model T. So if that's something you're interested in, please stick around and we'll see you next time. Cheerio.